Now, Brian Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you, the Morning Majority. 105.9 FM. AM 630. WMAL.
7:07, a happy Friday to you. This is the Morning Majority. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson. Mary Catherine's on her honeymoon. Tori Clark, kind enough to sit in again today. Thanks
nice
for coming back.
to let me come back.
Pleased to be joined by former New Mexico Governor and Republican presidential candidate Gary Johnson, live in studio.
Great to be here.
It is awesome to have you here. There's a lot of things to get into, and I want to get into it, but
Good.
I'm always fascinated to hear the background story of these candidates, how you got to be where you are, and I think your story is more fascinating than others. I've heard a lot of different things about it, so let me ask you, how did you make your money, first of all, because it says you were a businessman in construction?
Well, so I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I mean, 13 years old, I'm doing the yard thing. I'm throwing papers. But since I've been 17 years old, I paid for everything that I've had in my life. I started working construction jobs because those were the highest paying jobs. And when I was 21, a sophomore in college, a junior in college, I started a one-man handyman business, me, and actually grew that to employ over 1,000 people.
Wow.
I became Intel's facilities contractor before the 286 chip. So really, when you show up on time, when you do what you say you'll do for people, that's the result of that. And for me, one of the goals was to get enough money to be able to achieve freedom. So, that was money for me has always represented freedom. You get enough of it where you can do what you want to do when you want to do it. And that doesn't take that much money, but that was the goal, and I got there. And you never stop being an entrepreneur.
But that was so it's like the reverse of Occupy. What we're seeing in the Occupy today. You went to college, you paid for college, we're working side jobs, and did you even finish college?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then, I was down on Occupy Wall Street here a couple of weeks ago, and I share in that Occupy Wall Street outrage over the fact that this country is not about doling it out equally. Really, it is unfair. And at the root of it is the fact that politicians take payola to grant loopholes, if you will. And as governor of New Mexico, and what I think we're all outraged over is it's not fair. It's not fair. I mean, there are advantages to individuals, groups, corporations that pay for those advantages. And governor of New Mexico, 8 years, I vetoed a whole lot of legislation that would have given more of those favors out. I vetoed that kind of stuff. Government should be about creating a level playing field.
You have a great record on cutting the budget of state government in the state of New Mexico that was spiraling out of control. In fact, it's been written even by those who didn't like you as a lot of your policies that you really were responsible for leaving the state in a really solid fiscal state when you left.
Yeah, and I think what speaks volumes is the fact that New Mexico's 2-1 Democrat. That I'm this may be an embellishment. I may have vetoed more bills as governor of New Mexico than the other 49 governors in the country combined. So in a state that's 2-1 Democrat, I get reelected the second time by a bigger margin than the first time by being arguably the biggest penny-pinching governor in the whole country. I mean, what does that say when it comes to being a penny pincher? I think it speaks to the fact that people really appreciate good stewardship of tax dollars. People saw that thread, and that thread was equality. That thread was government should be the same to everybody. Now, that's my opinion. That's the pitch I'm making here out on the campaign trail.
All right, so you have this record, and you know how to grow a good business. You're an entrepreneur. Sounds like the kind of guy we need to be president of the United States. Why is it, do you think, given your credentials and your history and the things that you bring to the table, that your campaign hasn't quite caught on?
Hey, here's the rub. Do you know why I'm being excluded from these debates?
No, why?
The word is that because you're not polling at a certain level.
You got it. And why is that? So CNN determines that I have to be at 1% of A, B, C, and D poll. I'm not in A, B, C, D, E poll. About as unfair as it can be.
You're saying that the polls, when they ask people and say, do you support Newt Gingrich, Herman Cain?
I'm not
and
on
they
the
don't
list.
even mention you.
I'm not on the list. 5 CNN polls ago, and I'm outraged over this. 5 CNN polls ago, I'm at 2% of the national vote, which ties me for Cain, which puts me ahead of Santorum, which puts me ahead of Huntsman. The next 4 CNN polls up to today, my name is not on the poll. Last week, the CNBC debate had two criteria for the debate. One was 3% in any national poll before November 1st. I was at 3% in a national a Gallup national poll, and then the other was to be a declared candidate. We couldn't get CNBC to return our phone calls. That's not fair by any measurement. That is not fair.
How do you...
I'm asked to give suggestion on how this can be made fairer. Just put my name on the poll as to whether or not I should be in the debate. But to me, that seems fair.
Well, how would you determine, though? I mean, whose name gets on? I mean, what if John Smith from
I'm just talking
Texas.
about the poll. So my suggestion was, if you're a former elected official in the congressional, senatorial, or governor, if you're a former elected official in those areas, your name should be on. And you're a declared candidate, your name should be on the poll. To me, that seems eminently fair. To me.
I've got a more fundamental question. So you have the successful career in the private sector, successful career in the public sector. You've got a great life. You're from a beautiful state. What could possess you to run for president? By definition, you have to be a little crazy.
There's no skiing here.
Yeah. And then the downside of this is that I do live north of Taos. I live there because the skiing there is as good as anywhere on the planet.
That is real skiing.
And that's my passion. So downside is really not downside. May I also add, I've climbed Mount Everest. And I say that from the standpoint of, do you want a president maybe that's capable of hunkering down and doing what it takes to get to get to the top? I mean, things get in your way. That's life. Count on it. Count on things getting in your way, and you can do either one of two things. You can give up, go back home, or just quit, or you can just expect that those kinds of things happen. You can hunker down and you can make it happen. I think this is a job, President of the United States, that you want somebody that possesses those latter skills.
Okay, let's give you two scenarios. What would you do with the super committee, which is approaching its deadline? They really need to have it done 2 days before Thanksgiving, but it looks like they'll go right up against the deadline. And what would you do with the occupods? We're constantly debating what should be done with the occupods.
Well, looking at the super committee, look, what are they talking about? $1 trillion and I'm not going to get the number right. $1 trillion reduction over 10 years. One of my promises as President of the United States, I promised to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. Now, that doesn't mean that Congress is going to balance the budget, but I'm going to submit that document in 2013 for 2014, which is a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending. And I'm doing this from the standpoint that I'm in the camp that really believes that we're going to experience a monetary collapse unless we fix our spending. We have to stop printing money, or we're going to experience the same thing that Russia experienced. So I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. I am promising to veto legislation where expenses exceed revenue. And I will suggest to you that by doing those two things, spending will be lower than any other scenario you could possibly come up with, and that'll be assuming that they override my veto. And the last thing that I'm promising to do is to advocate throwing out the entire federal tax system and replacing it with the fair tax. You all have to have discussed the fair tax at one point or another. I think it really reboots the American economy for the next 100 years. In a business environment with zero corporate tax, if the private sector does not create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know under what scenario that would take place.
We'll talk with Gary Johnson, former New Mexico governor and Republican presidential candidates. More coming up. We'll get into Occupy. We'll also get into your belief of military cutting as well, and legalizing marijuana. All coming up with Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson is live in studio, former New Mexico governor and a Republican presidential candidate. We were talking about the super committee. You're one of the few out there on the Republican side that says, you know what, the military can be cut as well. How much are you willing to cut from the military?
Well, that document that is going to I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That is going to include a 43% reduction in military spending.
43%.
43%.
Wow.
And
I mean, that's a lot.
well, that is a lot, but if we don't do it, I suggest the biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we're broke, and if we experience a monetary collapse, we're going to all be left with nothing. This country is going to be nothing to anyone in the world. That we're not going to, much like Russia. I mean, Russia, that was a complete breakdown. A monetary collapse. That's when one day your money buys something and the next day it doesn't buy a thing. And by the way, it's not something that the government's going to say, hey, 2 weeks from this Thursday there's going to be a monetary collapse, so go out and buy everything you can because your money's not going to buy anything. And in Russia, how did that manifest itself? Well, when money wasn't worth anything, you worked in the chainsaw factory. You got a chainsaw on Friday for your week's worth of effort. You took that chainsaw and they developed the most sophisticated barter system in the world where that chainsaw, within a matter of hours after the worker received the chainsaw, he was able to barter that for clothing, for food, for milk, you name it, and that happened within a few hours. Well, that is not a way of life that sounds very appealing to me at all, and that's what happens when money is worth nothing.
I've heard a lot of analogies from the U.S. to Greece and to Europe, but not you compare us to Russia a lot.
Well, that's the monetary collapse.
Right.
That happened. The monetary collapse happened in Russia. What may or may not happen in Greece is the same situation.
All right. So if you're going to cut defense by 43%, and we're already getting out of Iraq, I assume that you want to get out of Iraq and you want to get out of Afghanistan.
Yes, and I would have been opposed to Iraq from the very beginning, looking at that from the standpoint of where was the military threat. Now, I know there was a lot of talk of weapons of mass destruction, but I think we have the military surveillance capability to see something like that happen, and we should be vigilant to that. I thought if we went into Iraq, we would have found ourselves in a civil war to which there would be no end. Afghanistan, I thought initially totally warranted. We were attacked, we attacked back, but after being in Afghanistan for 6 months, I suggest we wiped out Al-Qaeda, and that was 10 years ago.
Then does the Iraq model tell you no way we're going into Iran? No way we're going to bomb Iran?
It's the exact same model. Look, we should be vigilant to a military threat from Iran, but I suggest that currently they're not a military threat, and then the reality
Well, would they be a military threat if they got the nuclear bomb?
Well,
I mean, that's the big concern right now about Iran, that they would destabilize the entire region.
Absolutely, and I think it's naive for any of us to think that Israel is not going to deal with this situation, and perhaps
and then, of course,
to our best interest.
But then we get dragged into it because we have to help Israel.
Well,
we're pledged to do so.
Sure, and this will not happen in a vacuum. If Israel does do this, I mean, this would be in our best interest if, in fact, that does happen, and it's not going to be in a vacuum. So it's naive to think we're going to deal with this as opposed to Israel dealing with it.
That's a tough one, though. I mean, which is worse, Iran getting the nukes or Israel trying to take them out?
Well, again, you are not talking about a situation that is anything but complex, and this is the job of being President of the United States. And I will tell you, as Governor of New Mexico, I really enjoyed the job, the notion of understanding all these issues, bringing everybody to the table that has knowledge about these issues, and then acting in the best interest, in this case, of the United States of America.
What about decriminalization of marijuana? You are for it.
I'm for legalizing marijuana. Let me point out a difference between from me and everybody else on that stage when it comes to running for president of the United States. And if I may use the border as an example. Candidate number 1 wants to build a fence. Mm-hmm. Candidate number 2 wants to build a parallel fence. Candidate number 3 wants to run a moat down the middle. Candidate number 4 wants to run barbed wire across the top. Candidate number 5 wants to electrify the barbed wire. And candidate number 6 wants to run drones over the top. Don't build a fence. What an incredible waste of money. Make it as easy as possible to get a work visa, which would entail a background check. Then we switch to, well, what should we do about drug violence when it comes to the border? Every single candidate, with the exception of one, he wants to build a fence, but anyway, with the exception of one candidate up there, every single candidate wants to answer drug violence with more guns, as opposed to looking at the root of the problem, which is the prohibition of drugs. So legalize marijuana, and arguably 75% of the border violence with Mexico goes away, that being the estimate of the drug cartel's activities that are engaged in the marijuana trade. If we can't connect the dots between 40,000 deaths south of the border and prohibition, same same as with alcohol, where disputes got played out with machine guns on the streets, as opposed to in the courts, then we're not dealing with the problem. By the way, Brian, a poll by Gallup 2 weeks ago, 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. Legalize it, control it, regulate it, tax it, realize that this is corollary to alcohol. And having smoked marijuana and having drank alcohol, I do neither today, but having done that, my own personal experience, there is no category where marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol. Right. None.
Governor, before we let you go, would you run as a third-party candidate?
Right now, I am being hung out to dry by the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party could be standing up to the notion that, gee, Johnson should be on the poll to determine whether or not, and if Johnson meets the criteria for a debate and you're not letting him in the debate, where is the RNC?
So would you run as a third-party candidate?
I am, look, it's about a message. Right. It's about a message.
Well, no, but that's a fair question. Would you, I mean, if you're blocked from running, would you go for a third-party candidate?
Well, you can't help but consider it. You wouldn't consider it if you had a fair shake in. I think I'm speaking on behalf of the majority of Americans. I really do regarding these issues. But I have not been given a forum, and where is the majority of America's voice if...
I'm reading that as a maybe.
Yeah, that's what I am too.
All right. Fair enough.
Right. Is that fair?
Well, you have to consider it. I mean, I'm pissed off by the fact that I've been excluded from debates, that my name doesn't even appear on the poll.
All right.
Thank you for coming in. It's great.